So I wanted to talk about REST APIs in Servoy. Who has built some REST APIs in their life? A whole bunch? Oh, nice. Okay, cool. Who has consumed REST APIs as well? Okay, cool. So I'm done. Okay. So I guess this slide, you already know what that's about. So why would you need a web API? Well, there are so many other services like how do you call it, administration and other services that are only exposed by a REST API. If you want to use those services, you have to talk over those REST APIs. Now, really, REST APIs or APIs are the engine of the modern software development nowadays. So, if you got a product, you probably want to open that up as well using APIs. You don't want to give them direct access to your data using a database connection or something, so you have to create an API for that. And then in the end, you might want to publish that API to some central API hub or something like that, or on your own website. More on that later. So what is REST? REST stands for Representational State Transfer, which was first coined by Roy Fielding when he wrote his thesis in 2000. And the thesis was about architectural styles and the design of network-based software architectures. And it was an architectural style for distributed hypermedia systems. So it's not a protocol, it's a style. Like SOAP is a protocol. So REST uses the language of the web. So it uses HTTP methods like the get, the post, the put, and the delete methods, which usually translate directly to like a create or a read or an update or a delete statement, essentially, usually called CRUD. And then you give responses back, usually like with these series, the 200 series, that's a success code. 200 is success, 201 is created a record or something like that. 300 is redirection codes. There are multiple of those. Or you have like someone provides some bad data, so you give a 400 back as a client error. Or you don't have access, you give 401 back, etc. So that's the 400 series, and if you get an error, an exception on the server, then you usually get a 500 or in that range back. So that's the language really of the web, really, of the HTTP. So we're going to talk about a lot of things and call them by name. So let's look at how things are named really. So here we got a request. This is actually one thing. This is not two things. So you have the header, in this case post to a customers, it's the protocol HTTP 1.1. The host name is in there, and some other stuff in there, and then the request body is divided up by an empty line, and then you have the request body of your post, effectively. So this is really what is being sent over the wire, and also what you get back actually. So it's not like a really weird format or something. It's just text. It's really just text, and where the header and the body is divided up by a single line, an empty line. And it's also why you want to put as much stuff in the body and not in the URL when you want to encrypt it. Right? So if you use HTTPS, then you got an encrypted connection. If you put stuff in the URL that's visible, if you put it in the body or in the headers, then that will be encrypted. So here you got the request body. If we're talking about a response body, that's sort of the same thing. So we're talking about endpoints, URLs, routes, paths. it will get pretty confusing really quick. So we talk about here a URL, HTTPS, localhost, port number, please 42. HTTPS is the protocol. It can be HTTP, HTTPS, that defines the web protocol. The host, it's not host name, it's host, is localhost because it can also be an IP address. So then it's not a host name. And then you get the port, port number, and then everything behind that is the path of your URL. Everything behind the protocol is the route. And if we're talking about an endpoint, then we're talking about the HTTP method as well, which is in this case the GET. So if we're talking about endpoints, it's not just the URL, it's also the method. And then you get the result back, and that's called a resource. So actually, if you go to a website, you get a page back. That's the resource of that URL. And if you do it with a browser, that's usually a GET. So from that endpoint, you get some HTML back. In this case, as an example, you get a JSON back, which is the resource of that endpoint. Okay, so building a REST API. Well, within Servoy, there are two ways of doing that. You can use the REST WS plugin that's bundled with Servoy. And that works in a specific way where your form name is going to be the namespace, sort of the path of your endpoint. And then on that form, you're going to create specifically named methods. So WS read will translate to a GET, and will handle any GET request on that form name. And a write is a post, and the update is a put, and delete is the delete. So you get all the CRUD functions are available there. Any other methods that actually exist are not supported. I don't think so. So you got a function then for a post. So the WS write, and use the plugin, the REST WS plugin, to get its request body essentially, or the request, and then you get the contents of that, and then you handle that request. Actually didn't find a lot of documentation about that, so looking at Servoy again, how to really work with that. I don't really use the REST WS plugin. I use the other thing that I'm going to talk about after this. But so then you access that endpoint by an interesting URL here. So your host name, your port number of your Servoy instance, and then Servoy servers /REST_WS. And then you need to also mention the solution name where that form is located, and then the form name. So you probably want to put a reverse proxy in front of that, where you have like a nice logical name that actually maps anything that's behind that custom URL that you have for that custom domain, and maps it to this, and then anything behind the solution name will then be sort of passed essentially, because the form name is part of the path of your endpoint. So you should not put that in your reverse proxy. That should come from the requester. The other way of doing things is the Velocity plugin that gives you a lot of flexibility. It's available on ServoyForge. It's an open source plugin. It's based on multiple libraries, including the Apache Velocity, which is an Apache project from the Apache Foundation. And the Velocity plugin is really 3 plugins in one. It started out as a reporting plugin, hence the name, Velocity Report. And then Patrick Talbot wrote this and effectively implemented the whole REST and web page servicing functionality. And then the third plugin is actually you can use Velocity to actually consume other APIs. And there's a way of doing that. Sort of create an interface within your solution so you can use that sort of the Servoy way, right? Without writing a lot of code using the HTTP plugin. So with Velocity, you only have one point of entry, and that is like it can be on a form, can be on a global scope even, which is the VR, as in Velocity Report, get context. And as argument, you get a request object. And so the request object holds a ton of information already. So if you say request.method, then you can see how that endpoint was called. Was it a get? Was it a post? Was it a put? Was it a delete? Was it a head, an option, or a trace, or a patch? Those are all methods that are available with an HTTP call, and each have their own meaning, really. There are also some useful collections that you can use, so you can get the cookies that are being passed on as well. All the headers, any sessions, because if you have it as a session-based solution, so your instance is then a session. There are user groups and also request parts if you get a multi-part post, like some data and maybe some binary as well in your request body. Then it works with parts. There are also single values. All the information is available. That you don't have to collect it somewhere. That's just being passed in the request object. So path info, the protocol. So is it HTTP, HTTPS? Was there anything behind the question mark for the query string? Which form was requested, etc., etc., etc. So very extensive. So then you get something like this, the VR get context, define a response object, and in this case I don't even look at what the path was. This is completely just a dumb example. I call a method, I get a response back, and I simply say, okay, create a response and return that. That's really what it's about. You get the request, if it's a post, put, delete, whatever, do your thing, come back with a response, and then return that response, or turn it into a response object, and then return that. So in this case, I've got a try catch error. I'll simply create, actually, I could create an error response, but in this case, I create a normal response, and put in a JavaScript object with one property error, and put in the exception as a bit of a debug info. Very simple example. You can make this as elaborate if you want. So, and then the way you call this is pretty much the same thing. So for service / velocity in this case, because it's a different service. Also the solution name, so which solution the code is in, and then the namespace. So I call this a namespace because Velocity works with a config.json, where you can provide some mapping to specific forms. So in this case, config.json, it's a JSON file, where you say, okay, solution name, we say, okay, I use a pool of licenses instead of session-based. So I can specifically say, okay, I want to have all the requests done by a pool of, in this case, 5 clients. And if you get more, if there are more requests coming in, then it actually blocks it. It's the pull action. And I also want all my nulls be serialized. So and there are many other options that you can put it in. But what's important here is the pages. So pages, you can say, okay, the path API should be mapped to my form my API. So API is the namespace, but it will be mapped to your form inside your solution, which I call my API. And you might have another path called doc, and it goes to my doc, and then you can say asterisk for, okay, anything else will go to my everything else form. Or you leave it out and then it simply says, okay, forward, that's a path, I don't know. So that's how Velocity works. So here that namespace then maps to these API doc and whatever. All right, so that's building your API. There's some best practices when you creating those paths of your endpoint, and that is use nouns to represent resources. So nouns are effectively things, like clients or orders, and then also use the plural form, so not client and order, unless it's a single. So you say, okay, I want to have customers or status. If status only returns one thing and one thing only, that's a singleton. So you're not going to say, okay, /statuses, because that doesn't make sense. This is, by the way, also good practice for like table names, because you collect more than one row usually, so it should be plural form. Also keep the naming consistent over all the endpoints. So if you're talking about a customer here and then a client there, and they mean the same thing, that's inconsistent. So name both client or both customers. If there's some hierarchy, then use the / to indicate that hierarchy. In this example, you got customers, customer ID, and then the orders of that customer, right? So then that's an immediate filter on the orders. But don't nest too deep here. And in this example, you just go to customers, orders, and then the invoices of those orders. It gets confusing really quick. So you really should use customers, ID, orders, and then you get a list with order IDs usually, and then you can fetch the invoices per order on a different endpoint. So that's usually the best practice. Also use hyphens to increase the readability in the URL. So if you get like 2 words, like media devices or whatever, then don't make it 1 word, but do a hyphen in between so it's more readable, especially if there are longer names, longer words. And also don't use underscores because that makes it really unreadable. As an aside, with the REST WS plugin, the namespaces are forms. You can't use hyphens in a format. So there you have to use underscores, and that will translate to your URL. So that goes against the best practices. Also, never put CRUD function names, functions in the names, like get customers and update customers. Simply use the customer's endpoint and then use the method to say what you want, right? Post, get, put, delete, etc. And if you need to filter something, then you usually use the query parameters, which is anything behind the question mark. So here we say, okay, give me all the customers where the name is so forth. Also, don't use verbs like executing a URL. That's really an RPC. So remote procedural. I forgot what Z was, but call. Yeah, call. Remote procedural call. Exactly. Yeah, which is not REST, so don't use that. Okay, so now you have built your REST API, you're using all the best practices. Now you should document your API, because we wanted to publish our API, right? Everybody should be using our product. So yeah, there are several ways of documenting your API. You can simply write a PDF or a Word document and type it all out, or you can do it a standard way. Over the years, there have been a couple of standards, which is the Web Services Definition Language, WSDL, or WSDL, as they try to name it. It's an XML-based documentation done by IBM, Microsoft, and SAP. And then you had WADL, Web Application Definition Language, which was done by Sun Microsystems, again, XML-based. And then Swagger came onto the stage, and they created a JSON-based description, which was done by SmartBear. Actually, it was Booknik, I think, before that. But and then later, OpenAPI came, and actually, OpenAPI. Actually, what SmartBear did was give the Swagger specification to the Linux Foundation, and the Linux Foundation created the OpenAPI API initiative, and the Swagger spec became OpenAPI 2.0, because Swagger was at that point at version 2.0. So all the Swagger specifications are now OpenAPI specifications. And OpenAPI is JSON and XML based specification. So if we look at the timeline, then in 2000 you had the WSDL specification, and then in 2009 the WADL by Sun Microsystem. Then 2010 was Swagger was founded, and 2014 they already had the Swagger 2.0 specification. And then in 2015 they gave it to the Linux Foundation, and in 2017 we had a newly created specification from effectively the Swagger 2.0, and that became OpenAPI 3.0, sorry. And then in 2021, so 2 years ago, we had the OpenAPI 3.1. So Swagger, that's almost 9 years old, right? The Swagger 2.0. So OpenAPI 3 is now 5 years old, 6, sorry. So yeah, that's sort of the new way. And if we look at the OpenAPI initiative, it's an open governance structure, like I said, under the Linux Foundation. Many companies are part of that foundation. It's a vendor-neutral specification. Like I said, it's based on the Swagger 2.0 spec, and it's based on open standard like JSON, but also the JSON schema, etc., etc. So, and those schemas or those standards also change, and all those changes get then also re-implemented in like newer versions of OpenAPI. They're already working on an update of the JSON schema spec in like the 3.2 version of OpenAPI. So these are all the people, all the vendors behind the OpenAPI specification. Really big companies behind that. And if we look at these 5, these are the companies behind the other specifications, the WSDL, the WADL, etc., and SmartBear from Swagger. So all those companies are backing OpenAPI. So you could say that OpenAPI is now the de facto standard for describing REST APIs. And there are a ton of tools that work with OpenAPI specification. Auto-generators, converters, validators. There are editors as well. There are mock servers, so you can simply put in the spec and you didn't write any code. And you can simply start querying against those endpoints. You'll get some mock data back automatically, so you can start writing client code to test all that, parsers, etc., etc. So there's a ton of tooling available around this specification. All right, well, should we code first or should we design first? So there are 2 approaches here. So let's look at the code first approach. let's say the REST WS plugin, Servoy created a module, the Servoy API module, which is available on the Servoy package manager. And it's an API doc generator. And it works with the annotations in the JS doc header of your methods. So the WS read and write, etc., etc. So you have to define it in the JS doc. And then it will look something like this. Right? You get a WS read with a pet ID and you use your code in there, but you have to describe it all. So summary, the param, it returns something, and if it returns a 400 and it returns a 404 and what it all means and stuff. So that's being used by the module, effectively sort of parsing your code to create the Swagger 2.0 specification that looks something like this. So that's code first. You create your code, of course you document then also in your JS doc, and then it generates this specification for your documentation, which can be used in other tools like documentation viewers like Swagger UI or Postman as a client tool, so you can start querying your API yourself, etc., etc. So all that is being all those tools can use this specification. So, but this is a Swagger 2.0, so that's a 9 years old spec. Or you can take the design first approach. So you're first going to write your specification. So why would you do that? Because you can easily involve all the stakeholders when writing. Like John said with designing the UI. If you simply do it in that XD tool, you can get a lot of stakeholders involved before you even write a single code or put a single element on your form. The same thing here. Changing a spec is way cheaper than coding when designing. So coding the API also becomes easier because you just follow your documentation. You already spec'd it out. This is how it should be. This is how it should look. And you simply have to write your code and that's it, according to your specification. And like I said, the tools allow you to use a mock server when designing and all this stuff. And there are also tools to generate code stubs for client and server, although for Servoy, that's not really valid. But many other languages, it can generate code for you, which you then use to continue on essentially. So the only downside is that if you change the spec, then you cannot regenerate because it overwrites all your code. Right? It creates new files. And you do all this from a single source of truth, your specification, your spec. So this is the specification that you can look at, find at this API, and it's very extensive. You can describe pretty much anything, which is also a thing. Like if you do the code first approach, you're able to code something that you cannot describe using the API specification. So then you code yourself in a corner in that sense, right? Because if you cannot tell someone how to use that API, then what's the use of that API? Right? You need to have a way of describing that API to someone. So if we look at sort of the general structure of the API, you got a couple of blocks because OpenAPI, the specification is really like a hierarchy. These are top nodes, if you will. You got the info node, the host node, tags node, security, paths. Those are your paths, your endpoints. External docs and components. Components is an interesting one. I will show you later. But let's look at the info. Simple. That contains a title component, a description, contact information, license information, version, terms of service. So all that is part of your documentation and also can be seen on any documentation page or your tools, etc. So all your tools can see that information. Same thing with the contact. You can have your email address in there, your URL, etc., etc. So that's part of the specification. So I'm going to skip over the other ones. Paths is where all your endpoints are being defined. But if you get a lot of endpoints, then you notice that you have to repeat yourself a lot of times. Because if you do a post of a customer or you do an update, like a put of a customer, and do a get, and then you get the customer back, that's usually the same data. It's the same specification, same schema. So you're repeating yourself over and over again. So what you can do is you can do some code reuse, and they put that in the component part of the spec. And the component parts where you can store your schemas, the responses, the parameters that you have maybe in the URL or in the queries, etc. Any specific headers that you have defined, so you can just put it there and reuse that, reference them in all the endpoints. The request bodies, links, examples, callbacks, any secure schemas. Let me show you how that looks like. So I'm going to go here. That's not it. Here. So here I have the Swagger editor. So Swagger, so SmartBear gave away their specification. They're still a tooling company. So they got Swagger UI, Swagger editor, still named Swagger. So sometimes that's confusing. People say, I've got here Swagger specification, but they actually mean you've got an open API, especially if it's 3.0 and higher. But as you can see here, I hope you can see it, this is a Swagger 2.0, which is an example of Swagger. But let's convert this to OpenAPI 3.0. And now it's a 3.01 specification. As you can see here on the right, it also says this is OpenAPI specification 3, OS 3. And here you got all the endpoints certified. So this is sort of a preview the way Swagger UI would look like. So you can go into put, you click on it, you see what the request body would look like, which is JSON, and then you can see what all the responses would be. And same thing with a post. Here's it also specified. So it specifies what the structure should be, what the field names, the property names should be, what types they are, and if they're required or not. So if we go to schema here, then here you have all that specified. So and this is an enum, so that can only have these values. So you define exactly what you expect from that endpoint. So anyone who's consuming that endpoint knows exactly what should be put in there. This editor is it's an interesting editor. I can I need to put the proper YAML formatting. So here we got the info block, external docs, the service tags, and tags are being used, by the way, on the endpoints here. So this is a tag. This is another tag, and so you can put the tags on the endpoints and group them together. So a tool like Swagger UI will show them together. And then here you got all the schemas that are defined, and etc. So here I can collapse this. By the way, this is just a web browser. This is editor in a web browser. Very capable editor, I might add. So you got all the endpoints. Let me collapse all this. So look see what's going on here. So here we got the components, schemas and security schemas. Here we got the paths, the tags, the servers. Collapse that as well, collapse. This is the structure of your OpenAPI specification. So here we got a path with a put. So this combination makes it an endpoint. So this is how this endpoint is being used. Here we got a reference to a shared component, which is the schema pet. And it also says, okay, you can get it as JSON and you can get it as an XML, but it's the same schema. It's just a different format, right? And if we look at the schemas here, you can, let's see, type object has the properties ID, pet ID, quantity, and you exactly say what it is. For example, here we got a ship date. It's a type of string. Everything is being sent pretty much as a string or a number, an integer. And then you say it's the format, date, time. Right? So you tell the developer that consumes this API, I'm expecting a date, time, according to a specific format. So if I have that here, this is the order. Here's the date, time. Yeah. Usually in the examples it shows exactly what here, order, post. This is sort of the format. If you say, okay, it should be format date, then you get date dash month dash year, etc. So that's all being specified here. You can specify really like, okay, should it be, is it a required thing? I don't think they have that specified here, but here we got the required one. So from this object, these two properties are required. So they should always be there if you do a post or a put. So that gives you a feel of how this should look like and the structure and all the properties that you can put in here, which is a lot. So let's go back for a moment and talk about what you can do after this. Because now you have specified all those constraints, how it should look like, what is required, what data types. You tell the whole schema essentially what you're required. And since we cannot generate any code stubs, but would it be nice if we still could use all that information that we wrote down to use that as code? And I thought of that pretty hard, and I came up with this. RAR. RAR is the Reclassy OpenAPI router. I mean, I named it first OpenAPI router, and then it's like, well, it doesn't make for a nice short name, so added the R in front of it. So RAR. It's a Servoy module. It's designed to work with the Velocity plugin and also with the OpenAPI plugin that also Patrick created for me, which is also based on the Swagger libraries that is available, because Swagger open source is pretty much all its code, which is nice. And what it does, it uses your OpenAPI spec to map it to your methods. So your endpoints are defined in your code, and it comes in at your via get context, and then it gets mapped to your other methods. And on top of that, it does all the validations that you have defined already in your specification. So you don't have to, right? Before it reaches your code, it's already validated. If it's invalid, you don't have to do anything. The framework already gave it back with a 400, like, sorry, this is not good. And takes care of all the repetitive stuff that you can, so you can focus on your real business logic, really. So So here we got the paths, and so here we got the pets from the pet store path, and with the two endpoints, the get and the post, and both get an operation ID, which is part of the OpenAPI specification, by the way. So it's not a custom property here. So operation ID. It's an identifier, so that means it has to be unique within your specification. So here I have pets.get, pets.post, because that's on the post and the get. And I'm using the periods here, so I can, because you can simply use just a long name. But if you use periods here, then RAR will look at the operations map in a hierarchical way. So you can do this. So here we got the operations map, which is just an object. Pets.get.post, right? And then you got your method reference on those property names. So that's the mapping. So these operation IDs get mapped to these methods. And then you put in another variable here where you use the load OpenAPI file. You pass the operations map and you tell where the file name, which looks into the velocity report folder. And because you pass the operations map with that, then it validates also. It's like, are there missing operations IDs in your spec? Are there missing functions in your operations map because there are operations ID that haven't been mapped? So all that to keep your code and your documentation in sync, right? So it's there to help you. And then you get a method like this where you say, okay, I need to, so we're going to pass a context, which is a JavaScript object. So that's always done by reference. So you're not throwing data over the wall all the time. And you can put data into that context, into that object, and use it here. So we have a standard context that we need. So we use the scope OpenAPI create context. We pass the request. That request will be part of the context as well. And then context.response is sort of a custom property that you might want to add, or anything else that you want to add to the context to be passed around and be used in your methods. And then the only call you do is scopes OpenAPI.router, where you pass the spec, the operations map, and the context. That's it. It does all the validation. If it's not valid, it returns it. If someone tries to call an endpoint that doesn't exist, you get 4 back. That tries to use a method on a path that doesn't exist. They want to do a delete on /paths, and that's not allowed because you didn't specify that. So that's a 4 or 5. The method is not allowed or not supported. If they do an options call, like that's part of the HTTP method, right? Give me the options of this path. That returns all the possible methods of that specification. Does all that for you. Validates all your, like if there is a request body, is it valid? And then passes on to your method, like here, for example. This is your repat method. You get the context, you do your business logic, you put in your response. You don't have to return anything because it's by reference variable. So at the end of the method, then it comes back here. And then you say, just to make it fit on the slide, and put it in a shorter variable. But the response, you create the response and you return the response, and that's it, done. Very simple, because you did all the work already. So why would you repeat yourself? It's going to be available at the end of the year. It's going to be open source, and I'm going to put it up for Forge. It's already pretty far using it in a couple of projects, but there's still some work to do to get all the validations and the vocabulary of the OpenAPI in there. So, but it's coming. Any questions? We need a mic? Push the button.
And so how would you use this what you just showed, actually speaking to Servoy to action your APIs?
How would you use?
Yeah, how would you use that?
In the same way you would use Velocity Report, so the Velocity plugin. It's effectively a library that you use with the Velocity plugin. So you create your config.json with your solution, your path, and pages. And you say, okay, API goes to this form and this via get context. And then any path of your endpoints, or all your endpoints essentially, then are being passed to this OpenAPI.router, and that's it. And that get mapped to the operations map, and those methods will return all the code. And so the benefit is that all those methods don't have to do all the validating and expecting. It's like, is there a value? Because it's a required value. That sort of thing. So because you specify that already in specification, then the OpenAPI router will validate that. And if they don't pass that required field, it won't hit your method. It's already being returned to the caller. It's like code 400 or you're missing these specific fields. It will specify that actually. So it provides also a lot of debugging information for the consumer of your API based on your specification.
So this only works if you're on Team Velocity Report. What if you're on REST AWS plugin by Servoy? Is that going to work? Is it possible to do?
This is not going to work with the REST AWS plugin because that's every method is an endpoint. And I don't think you even get paths. I mean, I really don't use it. So Velocity gives me way more flexibility, more control freak, I love it. So it gives me all that information, especially in that request object. Everything is in there. This is really designed to work with Velocity.
Okay, thank you, Scott.
Sure.
I understand that your raw plugin is not going to work with REST AWS, but the OpenAPI plugin, is that independent of Velocity, or is that dependent on Velocity as well?
No, OpenAPI plugin is really just a way of reading the YAML or JSON, it can also be JSON files, and turn it into a JavaScript object so you can use that in your code. So then you have a representation in your JavaScript.
So the OpenAPI plugin doesn't do the validation, it's your bit that does the validation and rejects the request prior to...
No, that's really the sort of my code in the module. So the OpenAPI plugin is really just to read the specification file.
Okay, thank you.
So it's part a question about how use authentication in the API. Because we could use the AWS authenticate for that. but then you only have basic authentication under that. How about if I want to use bearer token? And the thing that Patrick built, the velocity also has support for that, or
I mean, bearer authentication. Pretty much all the authentications are part of the header, right? So all that information is in the request object, and then your code can use that to act accordingly. So any tokens, any basic authentication, all that information is passed to the request object, and then you can write code for that to handle that, and then say you're not allowed or you are. So that's it's really. I mean, it gives you a lot of freedom, essentially. It's not like really frameworks, like this is how you have to do it. It's like, no, here's all the information. That's it. And if you want to create a response, then you call a function that creates the response and put in the headers, the cookies, and whatever. You can do all that. Custom headers. That's really what the Velocity plugin does for you.
yeah, because well, I understand. This is good that we have the freedom to do that.
Yeah.
We do that there, using not using Velocity, but using just Servoy, normal Servoy behind it. And I was just expecting something like the WS Authenticate that supported that by itself. But anyways, you have to create a function and reuse that to process the request, the token that is coming with within the request, right? So, yeah, I was, and if it is, well, and just more a question for those of white people, then I don't know if that's a question for now, but if this is going to be supported in the future.
Any authentication? Yeah. I mean, any authentication is in the end web REST, and I know that the REST WS plugin has sort of a way to say, well, any authentication things will go to a specific method. Again, that's kind of frameworks, like okay, it has to have this name, and I'm sort of want to do something the same thing in my API router where I can add a fourth parameter that says, okay, any security, any authentication, or any endpoint that has security defined on the endpoint, your specification, will get passed to that method where you then handle it accordingly. Because the OpenAPI router collects a lot of information already for you, puts that in the context in a structured way, like which path it is, the security things, and my time is up, I see, and provide it to the method so you can use that. In the end, you can also actually use it for logging, which is, by the way, something that I would strongly advise. Log everything that comes in and out, because you have no visibility on what's going on your APIs. So log everything.
Yeah, we have to round up.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you very much, Robert.